The problem with teeth was not the teeth themselves, it was the shape of them. I had known this for some time, carrying it the way you carry a stone in your boot, aware of it with every step, but unable to stop long enough to deal with it properly. We had forged shafts. We had bored cylinders true enough to hold pressure. We had cut lead screws and scraped surfaces flat by the three-plate method until the oilstone marks bloomed even across the iron like frost on a window. Season by season, wall by wall, we had built our way through problems that should have been impossible in this place, with these hands, in this era. And yet here we stood, stopped at teeth. Not teeth in general. A toothed wheel is not a gear. That distinction sounds like a philosopher's quibble until you watch what happens when you load a crude tooth wheel against another crude tooth wheel under real torque. The teeth don't roll against each other the way they should. They catch, they scrape, they hammer each other at the point of contact, chipping and wearing and screaming with a sound that tells you, clearly and without ambiguity, that the machine is eating itself. I had seen it in the works twice already, once on the trip hammer drive, and once on the first attempt at a reduction stage for the water wheel, and both times we had backed away from the problem rather than solving it, routing power through other means, buying time. Time was running out. To build the heart of a machine, I told them, we need teeth that don't fight. We need the curve. We were gathered in the measuring room, the four of us who had become, over these seasons, the inner circle of what Iron Ridge was trying to become. Baktaho stood with his arms crossed, the way he always stood when he was listening hard, but wanted you to think he was merely tolerating you. Seo-rin had her record book open on the bench, brush ready, though she hadn't written anything yet. Cho Yeong sat on the edge of the work table, with her hands folded in her lap, which meant she was paying close attention. When Cho Yeong stilled her hands, she was thinking. I set a crude wooden tooth form on the table, beside a sketch I had made the night before. The sketch showed two circles, pitch circles I had labeled them, though I hadn't yet explained what that meant, and the teeth projecting from each, and the small arrows indicating the direction of force at the contact point. The difference between a machine that screams and dies and one that hums for 30 years is a curve too subtle for the eye to see. Seo-rin leaned over the sketch. She was the one who would want the precise language, the measurable definition. What curve? The involute. I said the word and felt, as I always did when I reached the true boundary of what I knew, the particular discomfort of a man standing at a door he cannot open. I understood the involute in the way you understand a principle from a textbook. I could describe it, I could explain why it worked. I could tell you that if you wrap a string around a cylinder and trace the path of the string's end as you unwind it, the curve you trace is an involute, and that teeth cut to this profile will roll against each other at the contact point, rather than scraping, maintaining a constant velocity ratio, transferring power smoothly across the full arc of engagement. I knew all of that. What I did not know was the deep geometry, the mathematical machinery that would let you generate that curve precisely, tooth after tooth, identical on every wheel, at any scale, for any number of teeth. That was not engineering intuition. That was not process knowledge. That was pure mathematics, the kind that lives in a mind shaped for it from the beginning. I know the door, I said. I don't have the key. We need a machine that draws this curve, and a mind that truly speaks it. Cho Yeong looked up from her folded hands. There was no defensiveness in her expression, only the honest assessment of someone who has spent years learning exactly what her gift is and what it is not. Her gift was extraordinary, a sensitivity in her fingertips that could detect a deviation of a fraction of a hair's breadth, a feel for the living geometry of a curved surface that had saved us more times than I could count. She had corrected spindles by touch that Seo-rin's gauges had not yet caught. She had shaped bearing surfaces that fit so well the oil between them barely had room to breathe. My hands judge it, she said. They can't draw it. Seo-rin set her brush down. It's a thinking problem, pure geometry, past both of us. She said it without shame, which was one of the things I had come to respect most about her. Seo-rin's entire discipline was the honest acknowledgement of what could and could not be measured, proved, recorded. She did not pretend to knowledge she lacked. I looked at the sketch. I looked at the crude tooth form. We could make everything an engine needed. We had the cylinder, or nearly. We had the piston. We had the valve work in progress. We had the means to cut a crankshaft, or would have once the boring bar was refined another degree. We had iron good enough, and bellows strong enough, and the forge hot enough. We had built our way, season by season, to the threshold of the thing I had been working toward since I first woke in this place and understood what it was going to take. We can make everything an engine needs except the one thing that makes it an engine, I said. Gears are the gate, and the gate's shut. Baek-tae-ho made a sound in his throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a grunt. The sound of a man who has watched you solve too many impossible problems to be entirely surprised, but is not yet ready to concede this one. The path was the same path it had always been. Every wall we had hit in this place had the same shape, a problem that required both a machine and a mind, and we had neither, and we had to build one and find the other simultaneously. The lathe had required a treadle drive and a turner's instinct. The flat plates had required scrapers and a geometer's patience. The lead screw had required a threading tool and Seo-rin's measurement discipline applied over weeks of iteration. The gear required a machine that could generate the involute curve mechanically, cutting it into metal through controlled motion rather than through a craftsman's hand, and it required someone who understood the underlying geometry well enough to set the machine's parameters correctly, to verify its output, to extend the method to new tooth counts and new modules as the engine's design demanded them. I was not that person. I had made my peace with that. A machine that cuts the curve so no hand has to, I said, and a true geometer who thinks in these curves the way Baek thinks in fire. Baek-tae-ho looked up at that. He understood fire the way Cho Yeong understood surface, not as a set of rules to follow, but as a language he had been speaking since childhood, a thing he read in color and smell, and the behavior of the metal under the hammer. The forge was not a tool to him. It was a medium. I needed someone for whom geometry was the same kind of medium. I'm not that person, I said again. It needed saying twice, because the people in this room had a tendency, understandable and occasionally dangerous, to assume I had the answer already and was simply leading them through the steps of arriving at it themselves. Sometimes that was true. This time it was not. Seo-rin had been quiet for a moment. She was looking at the sketch with an expression I had learned to read. Not the focused look of measurement, but the slightly distant look of memory. There was a woman, she said, a refugee, came through the eastern checkpoint 2 seasons ago. The gate guards thought she was mad. A pause. She was drawing on the checkpoint walls, geometric figures, curves. The duty officer had her scrub them off, but I saw them before she did. I waited. Sacred temple geometry, Seo-rin said, the proportions used in the old mandate architecture, the load-bearing arches, the vault curves. The mandate died, and they threw her knowledge out like the rest of us. She looked at me. She was a savant. The curves she was drawing on that wall, I didn't understand them then. I understand them now. I looked at the sketch, at the involute, at the 2 pitch circles, and the arrows showing the rolling contact. The sacred curves of mandate architecture, load-bearing arches designed to transfer force smoothly along their length, to eliminate scraping stress at the joints, to maintain a constant relationship between load and support across the full arc of the vault. A geometer trained in those proportions would have spent years learning to think in exactly the kind of rolling, constant ratio curve that the involute tooth profile required. Not because anyone had told her it applied to gears. No one in this world had ever built a true gear, but because the mathematics underneath was the same mathematics, the same door, approached from a different corridor. A mind that already lives in these exact curves, I said. Yes? Take me to her. Baek-tae-ho uncrossed his arms. He picked up the wooden tooth form and turned it in his hands, examining the crude profile with the same critical eye he turned on a piece of iron that wasn't quite right. He set it back down. A machine that cuts a curve no hand can. He said it slowly. The way he said things he was still deciding whether to believe. Why does this one still sound like sorcery? Because it's the cleverest trick yet, I said. The curve is generated by motion. The machine doesn't need to know the shape of the curve. It produces the curve as a consequence of how it moves. You set the relationship between the cutter's rotation and the blank's rotation, and the involute emerges from the kinematics. The geometry is in the mechanism, not in the hand. He looked at me for a long moment. Let's go build it, I said. 2 tracks then. The same 2 tracks it always was. Build the machine, find the mind. The gear-cutting machine, what I was already thinking of by its proper name, the hobber, though I had not yet said that word aloud in this room, would need a cutter ground to a specific form, a blank holding arbor, and a drive arrangement that linked the rotation of the cutter to the indexing of the blank in a fixed ratio. The kinematics were not simple, the tolerances were not forgiving, but the principle was sound, and we had the scraping practice and the measuring discipline to chase the tolerances down. And somewhere in the refugee quarters east of the Vale's edge, a woman who had been drawing sacred geometry on a checkpoint wall was waiting to find out that her discarded knowledge was, in fact, the most valuable thing in Iron Ridge. Every season had its one hard problem. The first season it had been iron itself, getting metal out of the ground and into a form we could work. The second had been the lathe, the machine that made machines possible. The third had been flat surfaces, and the 3-plate method, the foundation of all measurement. This season, the fourth, the problem was the gear, and beyond the gear, not far now, close enough that I could feel the shape of it the way you feel a room's dimensions in the dark, the engine. Crack the gear, and the engine was nearly in reach, the machine and the mind. Build one, find the other. I rolled the sketch and tucked it under my arm. Outside, the Vale sat over Iron Ridge in its pale, diminished dome, a little thinner than it had been last season, a little more translucent at the edges where the mandate was bleeding away. I had stopped looking at it the way I used to, with the particular dread of a man watching a countdown. I looked at it now the way I looked at a tolerance stack, as a number that was getting smaller, that told me how much work remained, that did not care about my feelings on the matter. The gate was shut. We were going to open it.